Hey, people, it's Sleepy Reader. Damien coming at you with a big fat video. I'm going to try to do my new comic book day haul, which was earlier today. This is late night Wednesday now. And I'm going to try to do a comic book countdown of my comic book thoughts. What comics gave me the most pleasure, the least pleasure to the most pleasure, counting down 27 comics. I read them all maybe in the past 7 or 8 days because I got behind due to having too much fun over the 4th of July long weekend. So my wiser self was going to just do the top 10, but then I decided, what the heck, I'll just do a long video. That said, I started a video earlier today and got interrupted twice and finally gave up because I kept losing my train of thought. So we'll see how this goes. Just the other day, I got in the mail, I guess yesterday, this giant Thor book. You can see what its size compared to a normal comic book. And I already had the giant Fantastic Four. So I'm curious to see how far Marvel will take this. This is their third really giant book. I think they're bigger than most of the artist editions put out by IDW. So they count amongst the biggest comic books I know of. And since most of them have a lot of Jack Kirby, and the one that has other artists besides Jack Kirby has John Byrne and John Buscema, so that's all awesome. I'm excited about all this. So I hope this trend continues. Even though the first one, the Behold Galactus, was a list sticker price of only $50, which online you can get for a lot less, which seemed like absurdly cheap for what you got. These ones are, I think, in the $100 range. I think I got about 45% off on them, or maybe 50% off on one and 45% on the other. So anyway, still well worth the money in my opinion. Be that as it may, what did I pick up today? I thought I was going to get 9 books when I figured out what was coming out of my pull, and somehow I ended up with 16 books, which is really kind of a crisis. Nine books I can read comfortably and feel like I've read a lot of new comics during the week and squeeze in a few old comics that I like to read. But with 16 comics, it tends to overflow into the next week, and unless I have a slow week. So in this last one, with the 27 comics here, they aren't even all I got in those 2 weeks. So 30 comics in 2 weeks is just too much, and this trend is continuing. Anyhow, one thing I picked up off the shelf, which is from a few weeks ago, I think, is this Captain America and the Invaders, written by the venerable Roy Thomas, one of the leading lights of the late Silver Age, early Bronze Age. And I hear that this is a very old-fashioned feeling comic, and that's what made me decide to pick it up. I'm just curious to see what old Roy can do now. So we'll see. This is for the nostalgia side of me. On the opposite end, well, not entirely, I suppose, because there's also is the Silver Surfer Black, written by Donny Cates. Am I leaving fingerprints on it already? Art by Tradd Moore, very psychedelic, kind of a heavy metal side of things, kind of. So I'm really looking forward to that, especially for the art. We got Hulk number 21 with a guest artist, so that's a little sad, but still, I'm very excited for this. We just got a Hulk 2 weeks ago, so they are pumping out the Hulk. Spider-Man life story, the aughts or the 2000s. I usually call them the 2000s, but the way it's written here, I feel like I should say the aughts. I think Peter Parker's now into his early 60s. I'd have to figure that out. But as I've said before, I've really started to enjoy this series, so I'm looking forward to it. This cover makes me think of Jasper Johns, if anyone remembers that member of the fine art world, who did a lot of paintings with American flags, sort of like this. And I think he was big in the 70s and maybe the early 80s in the New York art scene. I don't know if they were at all trying to reference that. My only mainline DC book this week, amazingly, is The Adventures of Jimmy Olsen, Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. My copy's all warped. It's weird. And all the copies on their rack were warped too. So rather than say, hey, I want you to order me a new copy, I was like, I want to read this now. So Matt Fraction doing Jimmy Olsen, Lieber, I forget what Lieber's first name is. Steve Lieber? Yeah, Steve Lieber doing the art. So I'm real excited about that. That seems like a good pairing. And it seems like they're going for the wacky side of the old school Jimmy Olsen. So that's totally in my wheelhouse. Excited for that. Then there's a new young animal book called Collapser. And I don't know what it's about. I think I must have read a description, 2 months ago in previews that made me get excited about it. But I think I'd probably pick up just about any young animals book right now. They are kind of the Vertigo, the old school Vertigo, that plays with the DC universe, but in an adult way. So I'm looking forward to that. And I love this cover, actually. Is a collapser like a collapsing star, or is that a collapse star? Anyway, I'm curious to see what goes on there. Also very excited for anytime a new issue of Lucifer comes out. One of my favorite comics every month. And so I'm hoping it's Vertigo, and Vertigo is officially going to be phased out. I'm hoping that Lucifer and most of the other Sandman universe comics will continue under some other label, whether that's Black Label or just DC. That would, either way, doesn't matter to me. But the other Sandman universe books I plan to read in trade. But I think I picked the right one for me to get as a monthly. I wonder who the artists are. Last month was a fill-in by Kelly Jones, which I really liked a lot, and I really like Max Fiumara, and he has come back. I don't think, it doesn't look like it's Dave Stewart on, was it Dave? No, it was always Dave McCaig. I like that they put first and last names in the credits on the cover. Then we've got Fair Lady. This is a really nice cover. This is one of those embarrassing comics that I've now bought 4 issues and I haven't read a single one. I've just thumbed through them. They look nice. I hear other people say nice things about them. I like the idea that a lot of them are one-and-done stories in a given issue. Lots of pages. So I've got to get on this. Although now that I've got 16 comics this week, that seems unlikely. The Quiet Kind. I know I picked this. I remember picking this out of previews, but I can't remember why anymore. But I like the idea that it was an oversized one-shot from Dark Horse. I love that cover. I'm a little less thrilled by the glance at the art on the inside, but we'll see what it's like. Again, love the idea of a one and done. That this must be like 60 pages or something like that. 50 or 60 pages. Infinite Dark is another embarrassment. I'm about 4 issues behind on this also. So I was really enjoying it. Something happened. I might be missing an issue, and that might be part of the problem. Since I have so many comics on my pull list, I can't always keep track of them until it's too late. And then if my shop fails to deliver something, I won't even notice it occasionally. Sometimes I notice right away, but sometimes I won't notice for quite a while. And another embarrassment, Blossom 666. I've only read the first issue. I liked it. This is issue 5. So at this point, it almost seems like I would have been smarter to wait for the trade. But oh well, it's on my pull list. Also a great or fun cover. A little confusing, but also a little cool looking. I'm super excited, and I'm caught up on Bronze Age Boogie, so can't wait to read the next issue. Another great cover, especially color-wise. I think color is more and more my focus, and the more I think about color, the more picky I'm getting about color, I think. Usagi Yojimbo. I loved issue 1 of the new color IDW Usagi. Tom Luth does the coloring. He's also the colorist on Gru. And I feel like he does coloring just right for, a lot of comics could use this style of coloring, but he does color just right for Gru and this kind of thing. And his colors look good on the slick paper. They're not quite the same as they would be, I think, on back in the days of the more absorbent newsprint type of paper. Speaking of color, I know the color in Little Bird will be amazing. I think this is the last issue, and then there'll be a hardback. Maybe there'll be a sequel at some point. Unless I hate this issue, which seems unlikely, I will no doubt be double dipping on the hardback of Little Bird because I've loved it so much. And I love more and more collecting hardbacks, especially if they're giant size. Speaking of a little oversized, I've got The Creeps, which I've grown more and more affection for. This is a bizarre cover given that it's by Richard Corbin. I don't know if it's a reprint. It says Corb on the... I've never seen it before. It says Corb on the signature. But Richard Corbin doing a humorous vampire picture, that's not his usual thing. The Creeps is sort of silly, very nostalgic for a creepy and eerie magazine. But I look forward to it more and more. I think it's bi-monthly now. It used to be quarterly. Published bi-monthly, which almost quarterly was enough for me because it takes a while to get through all the stories in there. But I'm not going to knock it for coming out more often. Speaking of coming out often, not Love and Rockets. I can't remember the last time I got a Love and Rockets. I will need to go back and read some, and I think this may be another one where I may have missed some issues and didn't notice that my shop didn't get them to me. So I have to dig up all my Love and Rockets and see which ones I've got. I feel almost like I need to start back with the first issue. I love that Olive Oil is on that cover. I like the back cover. I wouldn't mind, it may be sacrilegious, but I wouldn't mind a color Love and Rockets. Why not? I think it would work very well. Okay, and one of the things I just started reading is Steve Gerber Conversations, which I learned about from Ryan C. I think from his Patreon articles. I'm a subscriber to him on Patreon. And he made this sound great, and I've only read the introduction so far, and I loved the introduction, so I'm really psyched to read more. I'm not one of those people who think Steve Gerber is like the king of all writers from the Bronze Age. He's a certain flavor, and I like that flavor, and other writers are other flavors that I like just as much, like Doug Moanch and Steve Englehart, and even Roy Thomas, which some people I know have put down. And let me think, there's other flavors from the Bronze Age, but anyway, those are some of them that I particularly liked. But Steve Gerber does stand out as the most unique. And one of the sides of him that they mention in the long introduction is that he was, of the mainstream writers in comics, his attitude was closest to the underground comics. And, because he was so outrageous and he was poking fun all the time at the establishment. A lot of that establishment poking fun at was rather sophomoric, which also is true of the undergrounds. And his outrageousness in a way was more hard work than the undergrounds, because he couldn't just, stick a giant penis in something or whatever. He had to, come up with imaginative, crazy things that poked fun at other things. Not to put down underground comics, but I was sort of thinking about underground comics anyway, and then this made me think about it more, because I feel like in other ways the aesthetics and aspects of what used to be called underground comics have snuck into a lot of the comics I'm reading. And it's sometimes very, very noticeably, other times subtly, and other times it's not there. But anyway, that was on my mind actually from the 27 comics I read in the past 6 or 7 or 8 days. So let's see, I've gone for 15 minutes. My iPad might shut down on me, in which case I'll just have to restart. But yeah, let me go on to the countdown. So the most disappointing comic of this week's reading for me was Ignited from Humanoids. Partially that's expectations. I was so excited over the idea of humanoids, that kind of European voice in comics that we get here in the United States, doing a new superhero universe. But I think they brought in Mark Waid and some other people as the architects of that universe, and they're trying very hard to make it current, au courant American. And I feel the choice in the end has not clicked with me, at least so far, at least in Ignited, which is the, the flagship comic of the new universe, which I think so far has 3 comics in it, and I haven't tried any of the others. But I don't, they just put these teenagers on the cover, is striking a pose in attitude. I don't relate to these teenagers. Maybe I don't relate to teenagers. Although there are some other comics where the characters are teenagers, like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, that I'm enjoying. But anyway, I just couldn't get into them at all. For me personally, it doesn't help that their situation is so focused on kind of current events. It is horrific and interesting to explore what happens to the kids in a school after a mass shooting. And that's a serious topic that I guess is good to explore. But when I come in with the expectations of a superhero universe, I guess I have trouble connecting to it. For me, a superhero universe is more metaphorical and less direct, at least when it's most effective for me personally. So, yeah, a low on the list for me at number 27. And actually probably a comic that I disliked more, but I didn't have many expectations for, was Test, coming in at number 26. And so those are the 2 comics that I kind of felt I shouldn't have read in a sense. Test in particular, written by Christopher Sabella. I like the art and the color in here quite a bit, actually. I thought the colorist in particular kind of pulled the whole comic together and gave it its tone and its story sense. But the story, you have to work really hard to find the story in here, and you basically spend the 22 pages of this comic inside the head of a crazy person who's talking to himself and talking to seemingly imaginary people. So there's no other characters or interaction, and there's all this kind of poetic crazy person narration, which some people might really love. For me, after 2 or 3 pages, that's enough. And this guy can kill people really easily, and he kills a lot of people, and he's searching, we eventually understand, for this city that's some kind of testing zone for the future, American city that moves around. So that was a cool idea. And we eventually learned that he's someone who made his living by being a test subject in human medical tests, and I guess somehow gained some kind of monstrous powers through that eventually. He also seems to be a heroin addict. So anyway, all of this stuff I just had to work really hard at to find out. And I think most often comics' strength is the way the synthesis of words and pictures gets the story in your head really quickly. And it's a really satisfying thing, at least for me, to read a good comic book, because I get that hit of story in such a strong way. And instead I had to struggle and fight for little dribs and drabs of story. And I'm not much interested in a story that's just inside one person's head. Maybe it will expand, maybe it'll get a lot better. Maybe I'll forget to have them drop this off my pull list, and I'll get issue 2, and we'll see. Okay, all the rest of the comics were at least fine, if not better, as a read. So coming in at the lowest of those for me was Young Justice, partially probably because I did not read it with my daughter. My daughter read it by herself and liked it a lot. This is Young Justice number 7, the second arc, where they're flashing around the multiverse, bouncing from one different universe to another. A number of them familiar from Grant Morrison's work, I'd say, for me. And of course, we actually have them in the, the Kingdom Come universe at one point. It doesn't feel quite right to me, but maybe the idea of the Kingdom Come universe isn't quite what I think it is. Anyway, I don't know. There was something just about the way it was written that it just felt like it didn't matter and I didn't care. Glib one-liners and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know, just going through the motions or something to an extent, which is why I put it low on my list. At number 24 was Lois Lane. And there were some good things about this, but I'm often not on the same wavelength as Greg Rucka. I don't really enjoy the sort of perfect Lois Lane and the perfect relationship she has with Clark Kent. Maybe that's unavoidable, just the way it's been structured in the DC universe now. But human foibles and stuff like that would make her and Clark more interesting. It's also, she doesn't feel like someone who has a child in this. And I guess their child is kind of grown up now, thanks to Brian Michael Bendis. It was kind of cool that the Question showed up here, and the Question is helping her with her investigation. But to me, her investigation was, again, too real world, ripped from the headlines of, say, the New York Times right now about political shenanigans and corruption involving the camps for migrants on our southern border. And I think not based totally in reality, but so close that it just doesn't feel like part of the DC universe. Again, it doesn't work on a metaphorical level. It's literally pretend reporting about a current event with the Question helping the investigation. And I'd rather just read the New York Times, I guess, and read the real investigations into these things. Had great art, and I kind of hold out some hope that the Question being involved will mean some other sort of fantasy elements, you might say, from the DC universe will pop up eventually. Okay, and then at number... Oops, I got things out of order a little bit. Here, this is the next one. At number 23 was Hawkman. And Hawkman's way down on the list for me. It's still, like I say, all of these are fun enough reads. But compared to other Hawkman issues, the other 13, this is way down on the list. And I'm not sure exactly why. There's more stuff about the reincarnation. There's a bad guy, which is always nice to have a clear bad guy, Shadow Man. It ties into Year of the Villain, and we kind of get a hint of how it does by the last page. And so I don't know if some of the energy was sucked out of Vendetti's writing by having to hook up with the Year of the Villain, or maybe he hasn't come up with a good new plot yet after his big 12-issue story. Last issue was a one and done about reincarnation, and this seemed to have a lot of stuff about reincarnation in it too. So yeah, somehow just a little less energy going on in there. Then at number 22 is Black Hammer Justice League. And my shop put this in my pull list. I really didn't intend to get it because I knew it would be pointless for me. And it kind of just recapitulates some of the basic themes of the Black Hammer comic again with Justice League thrown in for good measure, and they switch worlds. So there might be something interesting with that coming up in future issues. But in this particular issue, it felt like a retread of for me as a Black Hammer reader, of very familiar territory and done in a more perfunctory, less interesting way. However, I think if you haven't read Black Hammer and you're a Justice League fan and you're willing to go for an odd, weird little Jeff Lemire comic, this could be a lot of fun as your introduction to Black Hammer. So, but I'm kind of souring on Black Hammer because I also read issue 11 of Black Hammer Age of Doom, which I would say is probably really like issue, 26 or 25 of the whole Black Hammer mainline story. And it looks like this is the penultimate issue. And we got a lot of hints here as to what the ultimate conclusion might be, the ultimate reason behind things, and even the ultimate relationship of superheroes and supervillains. And I find it all a little bit of a letdown. It's not horrible, but it brings down the whole Black Hammer series for me a little bit. I can't, if it winds up the way I think it will in next issue, I won't be going to friends here on YouTube or elsewhere saying, you should read the whole Black Hammer series. It was really great, which I thought was what I would end up saying, at issue 15 or issue 20 when I was really loving it. And it was another comic that was, a top 5 comic for me. So it's kind of sad to see that happen. It's almost inevitable, I suppose, that something you love doesn't stay the thing you love. Ironically, the same 2-week period, the World of Black Hammer Encyclopedia came out, a one-shot issue for $3.99. It looks very nice. It doesn't tell me, well, I haven't read all of it. From what I've seen, it doesn't tell me a whole lot new as a hardcore Black Hammer reader. It's fun to look at, but harder to read because it's got such small print. I feel like it's design over usability to a degree. But maybe I'm just being annoyed and picky about Black Hammer. So it's ironic this is coming out right when I'm thinking I'm fading away from Black Hammer. I put it on my pull list a while back because I just thought it's fun to have these about the universe kind of manuals. Particularly, I look back at comics or ancillary products to comics like this and really love them, years and years later. So I didn't put that in the ranking, but it goes in with the other Black Hammer comics coming in at 22 and 21. At number 20 is Supergirl. It's weird. This one says it's also a tie-in to Year of the Villain, The Offer. And it shows General Zod, I believe, on the cover. I think that's who it is. But he's not in the comic, and I didn't notice anything that was Year of the Villain in the comic. All of this does tie into Superman and Brian Michael Bendis' plot with what's his name, Robel Zar or whatever, and we have a lot of Zar in here, along with this crystalline leader of some planet who is very genocidal, and so we definitely have a sense of much of Kara's current quest coming to a conclusion, but again, feeling that pressure from the bigger story that's created by Brian Michael Bendis on the writer. So it was fun to read, but I feel like, and Mark Andreyko has done an admirable job doing his job on Supergirl, underneath the Superman story. But I hope there's supposed to be one more issue of this. And then I'm hoping Andreyko gets to tell his own Supergirl story that's not tied in to some larger continuity event type of things. So, and this one also had great art by Kevin Maguire. I think he really does a good sort of outer space Supergirl. Really enjoying it. I hope he stays on too. Then Up at number 19 is Superman Up in the Sky, which is the first two installments of Tom King's story that originally appeared in those Walmart comics. And I expected this to be really exciting. Tom King had talked about how it was going to be episodic, and each 12-page bit would be its own story, but then it would all link up and sort of a quest that Superman's going on. And you can definitely see where that's developing here in these first two stories. I think maybe, even though Adam Kubert did a good job on the art, don't feel it's a great match for the Tom King style. And also, Tom King just takes too cutesy of an approach. You know, he's both avant-garde-ish and then kind of cutesy and wink, wink, nudge, nudge about superheroes. I don't think he takes Superman very seriously. So anyway, there was some interesting concepts here, including a kind of almost dream sequence when Superman connects his brain to a computer on Ranagar, on planet Ran, I think, to try to track down a Zeta beam. And that was cleverly done, but the way it was drawn by Adam Kubert kind of made it feel like everything else in the comic rather than something separate happening. The art sort of made me keep forgetting that I was supposed to be reading a metaphorical set of pages about Superman's journey to knowledge inside this computer. Anyway, a lot of interesting stuff, but had expected it to rank higher. Red Sonja comes in at number 18. Another one that's drifting down in my esteem. I really loved the first three issues, and now it's slowly getting bogged down in kind of this storyline that just won't end, but not much is happening. Each issue just kind of a further exploration of the problem of a battle you can't win, and that's an interesting thing, but it's kind of grim, and I don't know. It's just not the story I totally want. I mean, I did enjoy it. I ranked it at number 18. Might have thought it would come in higher. Of course, there's so many. This is 2 weeks worth of comics, 2 big weeks worth of comics. So everything is going to be, or almost everything is going to be a little lower ranked than it would have been if I ranked them in 2 batches of 14. Sea of Stars from Jason Aaron. I was pretty excited for this, but now I realize he's co-writing with Dennis Hallam, and when people co-write, who knows what kind of story you're going to get. This one is an outer space story. I would say it's not, well, from what I can tell from this first issue, not really a science fiction story. When I read something that I think is science fiction, I'm looking for what the science fiction ideas are, the science fiction hooks, the science fiction variables, so to speak, and that interests me a lot. This, as I went along, I've decided is more like a fairy tale for kids set with a space backdrop. It's very nicely drawn, very nicely colored by Rico Renzi. Oh, look at that. That looks nice. It's fun. It's fun to read, and so I'm adjusting my my expectations. Now, will it really be a kid's story? That'll be interesting. I'm afraid to start reading it with my daughter and then have horrendous things happen in the next issue. That will be hard for her to deal with. There were a few glitches in the storytelling where it was like, wait, why did that happen? Especially in the last few pages where someone seemed to be alive who we absolutely saw die before, and there wasn't any hint as to why that would be. But anyway, so came in at number 17 for me. At number 16 is All Time Comics, which is in fact kind of an underground comic of some sort. It's these underground kind of zine-sters, or I don't know what you call them anymore, doing their homage to the Bronze Age still with all-time comics. This series is now called Zerosis Deathscape. I have no idea why. It's fun to read. This is a brutally bloody cover. I mean, this would have been worse than anything that was in old EC comics in terms of this cover, especially given that it's painted. The inside is not so bloody, but it's just wacky. And I enjoyed the wackiness. I don't really know what the point is. It's a little on the depressing side. It's sad losers trying to fight crime and basically losing. Maybe they will eventually win. And they're all on the edge of sanity and stuff. I guess a little bit shades of Steve Gerber, in fact. But Steve Gerber would have done more with these elements, I think. But future issues may show us more. I love the feel of this paper. I like the color schemes. Sometimes the visuals were a little hard to parse, so maybe the colors could have helped more with that. They actually had a good bit of the art drawn by Trevor Von Eden, who seems to have disappeared out of comics. So I'm surprised they were able to dredge him back up. Or maybe he's been dying to do comics and no one's been asking him. This wacky villain, I forget his name, was a lot of fun. I think he might be called the Beggar. Yeah, he is. He's called the Beggar. I don't know why. He's kind of like the Michelin Tire Man, sort of. Anyway, weird comic. Very much some kind of sensibility. It's not mainstream. Not sure what it is. Speaking of not feeling mainstream and more about irony and being some kind of put-on joke is Giant Size Ecstatic. And I suppose that's, what defined this comic back when they did it before. Was it the early 2000s or the aughts? Or was it the late 90s? I couldn't resist it. I bought it off the rack because of the Michael and Laura Allred art. And it's clever and lively, but the characters don't feel real. It all feels like a put-on to me. So I don't connect with it. I enjoy the pictures, and I kind of say, oh, yeah, funny, that's wacky. But I really miss when both the Allreds were working with Dan Slott and doing the also surreal Silver Surfer, which had so much more heart and character, and I don't know, it had a forward momentum to it. All that said, I am actually thinking that apparently this one-shot was a lead-in to the same creative crew on The Excellent, so I will be looking for that and probably picking it up just to enjoy the Michael Allred art and the wackiness. I love all his character designs, or I assume the character designs are from him for the superheroes, and the way his art sells those kind of character designs in a way that maybe some other artist would just make look ugly or, I don't know, silly. Allred kind of captures the silliness, but also sells it and gives it weight somehow. Okay, in at number 14 is Birthright. This has been a fantasy series that I've enjoyed a lot, kind of Conan meets Narnia in a way. Now that doesn't really capture what it's like, but sort of. It's pretty brutal and depressing, and so in a way I'm looking forward to it coming to some kind of closure. I think we've gotten all the major points about the characters, about the Fantasyland and its relationship to our world. So I think we need it all to come together into a big battle and see what happens. I almost feel like the artist is putting a little less work into it, maybe getting a little tired of doing this or getting busy with other things. Although, I don't know. Well, I love the reveal on the last page. There was all kinds of cool looking new characters there that I guess I shouldn't show in case it spoils for someone. Savage Sword of Conan, kind of similar to Birthright in a way, but Conan is a bit more like comfort food because Conan will always win, kind of the parameters of his world, And this new storyline from Jim Zub and artist Patrick Zurcher feels like it fits right in there. It feels like it's going to be a solid, fun Conan story. It's not going to, push my buttons negatively or push me too far in some other direction. But that's fine. For some reason, this was one I kind of mentally picked on for the coloring. The colorist seems to do a fine job, but as I looked at it more and more, I felt he could have aided Patrick Zurcher's art and given this world a more exotic feel if he'd been a different colorist or a colorist with a different approach. Most of this centers on a secret gambling den in the City of Thieves, Shadrazar. I think it's the City of Thieves. And there's a nice... it's definitely the early Barry Smith style Conan as drawn by Zurcher, and I appreciate that. Not that he's drawing like Barry Smith, but I mean the character design is Barry Smith's character design, and that's fun. So I almost feel like this might just be 2 issues or 1 or 2 issues, but we'll see. I'm in for the ride. Savage Sword of Conan makes me very happy now that I realize that it's going to be a bunch of different creators coming in to do short arcs. It's just interesting to see a lot of different people's takes on Conan, and the sense that they're taking the job pretty seriously. This is their chance to do Conan, and they're gonna have some fun doing it. Also, a lot of fun in at number 12 out of the 27 in terms of my enjoyment is Symbiote Spider-Man. I'm really getting used to the Greg Land art. I feel almost embarrassed to say that. But the story read very smoothly. I got little tidbits and hints of further plot twists and learning new stuff about the symbiote Spider-Man suit that will someday become Venom, right? So, although a little bird named Matt tells me that maybe some of these plot elements come from other obscure Marvel comics that most people haven't read and aren't completely original to Peter David. But a very fluid, very readable story. So I'm very happy that I've been reading Symbiote Spider-Man. Does it say it's going to wrap up next issue? No, I guess it doesn't. Pardon me while I'm looking around. But next issue is issue 5. I don't know why in my head it might wrap up then. Yeah, fun stuff. Okay. Now in at number 11 is a comic that I'm finding a little harder to talk about. I really enjoyed the first 3 issues. They're very retro, kind of idealized 80s comics, and they were originally done in the 90s, if I understood what someone told me correctly, that the first 3 issues of this were done in the 90s, and then they did 3 more issues to complete the story in the past year or so. It was a Kickstarter thing, and now they're publishing all the comics at Image. And so it might just be my imagination knowing that this is the newer stuff, but I feel like some of the energy went out of it, and that the high intensity pacing slowed down, which may be a good thing, but I kind of missed the pacing from before. And the whole thing jumps ahead 18 years, which maybe the creators have jumped ahead 18 years. And I don't remember enough of what was established in issue 3 to make that 18-year jump with them and still keep in mind what's important to know. I think this character here is new, and I thought he was quite cool with his demon's hand. And maybe this character is new too, this woman. I can't remember what either of their names were at the moment. But yeah, an interesting, still a fun comic. So that came, what did I say? That came in at number 10. At number 9, no, Section 0 is number 11. At number 10, I'm putting Second Coming. Another comic that's very hard for me to talk about. To me, it partakes of that underground comics feeling. It's doing some things that, at least to me, channeling my Catholic upbringing. This was kind of pushing some buttons and a real attack on the early parts of the Bible, like Genesis, and kind of an attack on the Old Testament God. And I personally found it disturbing to see God use a major curse word, the F word, and be portrayed entirely as kind of a jerk. On the other hand, Jesus is the good guy. He's also kind of the son who's annoyed by his father. It's an interesting concept, and one of the concepts is Jesus decided to go to earth, and he was doing all that good stuff that Jesus did. And then when he died on the cross and came up to heaven, his father said, "No, I'm not allowing you to go back. You couldn't make good in those 33 years you had down on earth. I'm not going to let you go right back now." So in a way, this is an alternate universe where Jesus never was resurrected. Now, I don't know if the writer takes that aspect seriously and is going to explore it. It seems like God. It's kind of like Archie Bunker being disappointed with his son-in-law, Meathead, who was the pacifist intellectual. So he sends Meathead, his wayward son, because he's so pacifist and believes in love and all that, sends him to go live with this superhero. So maybe it's kind of a critique of superheroes being like Old Testament God, or viewing justice the way the Old Testament does, and contrasting it with this New Testament kind of Jesus. But given that it's all set up in this way that, I don't know, I feel like my Catholic relatives would have trouble, would kind of choke on this material, the setup and the treatment of God, it maybe undercuts the message you want to give, although seems really cool to the people who want to be a little bit sacrilegious, a little bit in your face to the religious people, like in Underground Comics once upon a time. I thought the art was quite cool. So I definitely want to keep reading it and see what he's up to. It's a well done comic, but is it well thought out? And also, it is interesting that, in this age of so much worry about cultural appropriation, it's okay to appropriate the culture of Christianity any way you want, or so it's felt by one assumes the same kind of people who are all worried about, whether you wear a kimono or do other cultural appropriation kinds of things. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe Mark Russell isn't worried at all about cultural appropriation. Also feeling like an underground comic, but in a different way, more like a spacey art comic, is this new iteration or this new volume of Gerard Way's version of the Doom Patrol. The plot it's very fun, kind of weird art, weird yet cartoony art, and the plot seems to meander and embrace weirdness as much as possible. And I enjoyed it a lot, actually. I don't know if it will be satisfying, by the 6th issue or whatever, if I'll feel like I've really read a story, but I'll certainly feel like I've had a fun trip. I can't take too many comics that follow that route. It would just be boring after a while. But there's a love of comics in here and a love of the characters, even if there's not great plotting. That just makes it fun. And you can see that the art is not exactly like anything else, and it's the colors are fun, and just fun. Good. So what did I rank that at? Number 9, which is quite high on this scale. So we're getting into comics that I really enjoyed. So the last one, sort of the Second Coming, was kind of the comic that I enjoyed, but I just had an uneasy feeling about. But after this, it's sort of all pure pleasure in the top 9. So on that note, we have Betty and Veronica, the Friends Forever, return to Storybook Land. There's kind of a series of Betty and Veronica stories, usually almost always with Archie in them too, that are tongue-in-cheek retellings of fairy tales. And they're a ton of fun to read with my daughter. These ones are all drawn by Dan Parent, and his art is very simple, but I think his storytelling is very good, and he really helps the writer, Bill Goler, pull off these stories that are each 5 pages. Maybe some of them are 6 pages. And so I really enjoyed that a lot. My enjoyment would have been lower if I had read it by myself and not with my daughter. You definitely something to read with a kid, preferably, but still fun. If you like the really innocent old Archie having fun, this is fun. I really enjoyed this 2-issue Spectre story with Batman. Incredible art from Kyle Holtz, great coloring, and a fun story. Now, still, the writing was the weakest part. I really liked the writing in the first issue, but this issue left too many threads untied up, especially what the bad guys' power was and why they were doing what they were doing. They were defeated, but Tomasi really didn't wrap up what was going on with all these people dressed like the Spectre and all sort of repeating the same line as if they were all one person. What were they saying here? I'm not finding it. Yeah, lots of cool pages. This Kyle Holtz guy is good. I hope to see him on more. He kind of reminds me of, well, as I mentioned in the first issue he did, of Kelly Jones, but he also reminds me of Paul Gulacy. So it's like some strange love child of Kelly Jones and Paul Gulacy doing Batman and the Spectre. What more could you want than that? Paul Gulacy's still around doing artwork. Why DC isn't grabbing him to do more Batman himself, I don't know. The cult of the divine hand compels you. They all repeat over and over the cult of divine hand, but we never learn anything about the cult of divine hand. So that's this comic book, if it had fully reached its potential of tying up those threads, might have been, in the top 3 comics of this week's reading. Another cool comic with a cool artist, the Green Lantern, even a painted cover by this artist. I presume digitally painted, and by this artist, I mean, because the names are slipping out of my head. What's his name? Ian Sharp. It's Sharp. So it's Grant Morrison and Sharp. It's not Ian. What is it? Why do they always put the credits somewhere hidden away? They're not on the first page. They're not on the last page. Anyway, we're getting Liam Sharp and Steve Oliff, colorist. So I guess that's different than Pat Olife. Steve Oliff and Pat Olife. I had them confused there for a bit. We're getting a wonderful, wacky Grant Morrison story here, a beginning of a wonderful, wacky Grant Morrison story involving crazy planets and crazy universes and multiple versions of different superheroes, and I'm all on board. I'm really enjoying it. This promises to be better than the first 8 issues of Green Lantern by Grant Morrison, which I've been enjoying, but I'm looking forward to this even more. Grant Morrison, be Grant Morrison. Do it. Go big on the Morrison. I found myself I've always loved the art and found this a strong or solid read, Oblivion Song, and I ranked it this time way up at number 5. It's ratcheting up and some more interesting things are happening. My only complaint is I still have trouble remembering who all the characters are, And they still all look kind of alike to me. And I don't know if it's more the writer's fault or more the artist's fault or both of them. All I can remember is there's a main character named Nathan. And there's all these other characters who are mentioned by first name, but they're not kind of tagged as to who they are enough so that I learn who they are. So even in the previously in the comic book kind of blurb here, we say, Nathan, I remember who he is, narrowly escaped his first showdown with the Faceless Men. The Faceless Men are really cool, and this is what has me excited about this book. When he rescued Marco, I can't remember who Marco is. Ed, I can't remember who Ed is. Is that Nathan's brother, or is Nathan's brother someone else? Ed realized the Faceless Men are more advanced than they appear when they shot him down with a laser beam and killed Silverwing. I don't remember who Silverwing is. I assume that's not a human. Keith reappeared. I don't remember who Keith is. Seemingly an agent. So anyway, that's an example. And it doesn't help that I think Nathan used to have a beard and now he doesn't. So, yeah, it's fun stuff. Maybe if I went and read all 17 issues in a row or the trades, I would easily keep track of the characters. But as a monthly book, it needs to help me more with who's who. But that said, these creatures have either gained intelligence or there was always some really intelligent creatures hidden away in this land of oblivion, and now we're really getting a major confrontation with them. This is a Robert Kirkman book. He just ended The Walking Dead after 93 issues or 92. I hope Oblivion Song's not going to go that long. I think a good 40-issue run would suit me fine. We're on 17. Maybe a at the most 50 or 60 issues, but I know like Robert Kirkman likes to go long, and I admire him for that. But I don't feel like this. As much as I'm enjoying this story, I feel like it can all come together in another, twice as many issues as we've had so far, maybe. Criminal, the kind of open-ended Criminal that's the freeform series now, where they do one-shots or two-issue stories or as long a story as they want. We're now in a longer story, but it's made up of other shorter stories in a way. So last issue we got a Private Eyes story, and this issue we're getting a Teague Lawless story, of one of our most familiar characters from Criminal. But I gotta say, I just didn't. Normally, I would expect Criminal maybe to make it to number 1. This I ranked it at number 4. I just didn't get into it quite as much. Maybe this issue is working to get us to some other issue, some other point in the story, and that's part of it. I feel like I have liked Jacob Phillips' coloring in past issues, but somehow I had more issues with the coloring this time. Sometimes it just distracted me rather than guided me through the story, and the sense of randomness on some of these pages, this spottiness. I suppose it's supposed to be shadowing and nightlife kind of stuff, but it just didn't quite work. Small complaint. Still a really great, fun comic. Looking forward to where it will go next. So here's a big surprise up at number 3. I did not expect a comic by Brian Michael Bendis. And this one's another one of those reprints of the Walmart comics. This was I'm calling it Batman Universe. I don't know if that was the actual title of it in the Walmart comics. I guess maybe. Batman Universe Part 1. It's art by Nick Darrington, color by Dave Stewart. And that is killer. And Nick Darrington doing Batman gives it a little bit of a feeling of kind of an underground artist, but a very slick, talented underground artist doing Batman. And that's happened before, like with Paul Pope, and it has that vibe. And it's so well colored. I think I like Nick Darrington better than Paul Pope, to tell you the truth. He maybe is a little less out there, but I don't know. He just made this so good, and I feel like somehow even though it was Batman, Bendis's sense of humor and quippy characters was really fun and worked well here. We have Ginny Hex, which I don't know if he invented her, but she's also been introduced in Young Justice by Bendis. I liked her much better here for whatever reason, but she was a cool character. Cool mystery as to what's going on with the Riddler. I just really clicked with me. I really enjoyed it. You get to see Dave Stewart coloring Batman. That's very cool. So yeah, I can't wait for more issues of this. So my favorite Brian Michael Bendis comic. Man, I've just hit over the hour mark. I really apologize. Hopefully those of you who actually watch this long monster, you're the hardcore Sleepy Reader fans, or I don't want friends, not fans. Hopefully you're getting a lot of chores around the house done while you listen to me blabber on. Gogor is my number 2, or Gagor, I forget which is the proper pronunciation. This is that kind of feels like a children's fantasy story, but very original, very cool, by Ken Gehring. He does everything on this comic, even the lettering. And yeah, it's just really good. It really clicks. Fantasy elements kept going strong. A flying ship that looks like a rock, and a big fight with a bad guy, very creepy bad guy who's about to swallow our hero, but is luckily saved by Gogor. So yeah, I just can't wait for the next issue. I know that Ken Gehring doesn't expect this to go very long, so I think he's planned 1 or 2 short arcs, 1 or 2 short stories set in this world, and hopefully it sells well and he'll have to do even more. But I really like his approach here. I'm thinking this is one that's gonna, if it finds its market, is gonna sell really well to younger readers or people who like younger reader oriented comics once it hits the trades. And my number 1 was issue 20 of The Immortal Hulk, I guess from 2 weeks ago. Incredible cover. Of all the Alex Ross covers of recent times, to me, the Hulk covers are seeming like the best ones. Maybe because I'm loving the comic itself. I love the Joe Bennett artwork. The more Joe Bennett artwork I get on the Hulk, the more I crave Joe Bennett artwork. Fantastic coloring, too. Who's the colorist? Paul Mounts, I think. Really, it feels like maybe the art team they're really stretching themselves because of the great script. And so my only complaint about this was, so Hulk was apparently dead with most of his body burned away by acid and his heart pulled out of his body. And then he comes back to life, and it turns out the Harpy pulled out his heart to accelerate his return to life because he is the Immortal Hulk. But they really didn't show very graphically a Hulk becoming revitalized scene. There was something else they didn't put on the page so much now, I can't remember. But still, this is a good issue in a great series. Everything's clicking. I just hope this it can't go on forever, but I hope it keeps going on for a good long time. And yeah, Immortal Hulk, favorite comic of that series. Phew, I am really sleepy now. But let me mention, I had in that past 2 weeks got this X-Men, X-Men, what do they call it? Facsimile edition. I've just flipped through it, looked at the art, I've read this issue many times, but never with the original ads, and I spent a lot of time looking at these facsimile of the ads. And I enjoyed seeing there's just a few of them, ads for Marvel Comics. I guess at this point there weren't that many Marvel comics out, but so there weren't that many to advertise. But there was Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos #3, and I remember reading about how Stan Lee kind of had a bet with his publisher Martin Goodman that he could do this new Marvel thing he's doing and sell anything, even an unpopular war book with a silly name in the title, Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. And it's interesting that the blurbs here to promote it kind of reflect that, what Stan Lee was thinking. First, the Fantastic Four, and now in the same inimitable style, by the same writer and artist, another group of fabulous characters. Get your copy today. The Marvel Comics group ushers in the Marvel Age of Comics. So they were already calling it the Marvel Age of Comics. What was this, 1962 or possibly 63? I think 62, very early on. They advertised Spider-Man #4, another Marvel masterpiece. So Stan Lee really jumped on this quickly. The kind of branding that he was doing about Marvel and the specialness of Marvel so early on. I thought that was really cool. And shows, Stan Lee knew something special was going on, and shows that he knew how to capitalize on it. He was a master of creating that Marvel feel that happened. So anyway, yeah, I've always, people talk about the X-Men not being as good as other Marvel comics. I've always enjoyed the Kirby and Stan Lee comics. I feel like they're full of good stuff. Now, once it was Werner Roth on the art, I think Roy Thomas did an okay job on the script, but I think some of the artists were really wrong for the X-Men as they moved along. Don Heck was okay. I think Don Heck was on it, but Werner Roth and there was another guy. I think they kind of hurt the X-Men. Oh, and also I got these 2 Savage Avengers, and I'm not quite finished reading them, but I'm near the beginning of issue 3. I'm really enjoying them. Really kind of fun art from Deodato. Is it Deodato? Yes, it is Deodato. And great colors. It's just action and violence, but it's done really well. There's a way to make comic books in a groove, and this is in the groove, I feel, at least from what I've read so far of Savage Avengers. I totally poo-pooed the idea of bringing Conan into the Avengers, and I still basically think it's a bad idea. But as long as it's in the Savage Land, I guess it's kind of like a cool, weird Conan fantasy story with tidbits of other characters in it. So yeah, I'm going to go to bed soon. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you did watch all the way to the end. So, good night. More to come.